All right. So we had talked earlier about the scope of the fitness for duty evaluation. Here's what the ADA or the EEOC says about this in the context of ADA. The inquiries or examinations in a fitness for duty examination must not exceed the scope of the specific medical condition and its effect on the employee's ability, with or without reasonable accommodation, to perform essential job functions or to work without posing a direct threat. Now you may ask, well, what about then discussing reasonable accommodation? Unless the employer has reason to insist on it, my preference and my recommendation to them in our pre-referral conference is to split out reasonable accommodation questions as an iterative piece in the process, a later piece in the process. Let's do it stepwise. Let's first decide whether the person is fit or unfit. Then, since reasonable accommodation under the law, I'm not discussing whether or not, in most cases, whether the person has a disability. That's a judgment, that's a legal question. Fitness and disability are not the same thing. I appreciate that under ADA-AA, it is rather moot because the assumption will be that the person does have a disability, given that he has, by definition, an underlying medical condition that causes him to be unable to perform the essential functions of his job. I got that. But the employee is the one responsible for telling you what reasonable accommodation he or she needs to be able to perform the essential functions of the job. Let the employee do that. Now, if you find in that interactive process that that in fact is a reasonable accommodation, it does not pose an undue hardship, you can do it, bada bing, bada boom. Great, do it. You're working with the employee, you're cooperating with the employee, that's always a good thing. Let's do it that way. If, on the other hand, you say, are you kidding? They need 1.5 years off for this treatment, and they need to go twice, blah, blah, blah. Send them in, we'll do a second opinion on the reasonable accommodation question. That is, let's treat it iteratively. Yes, Rand?
Related to that, how would you approach an evaluation that might be an ongoing process? In other words, not necessarily fit today, not fit today, but not fit today, maybe fit for duty after X, Y, and Z, maybe a evaluation.
Yeah, so the question is, related to this, is how do we handle the person who is not fit for duty today, but we believe fitness can be restored in the near future? That's exactly what I'm trying to imply here, is that if that's the case, the employee is very likely to come back and say, here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to get into treatment. The psychologist that I'm seeing right now thinks that I'll probably be able to come back to work in a couple of months, can resolve these issues, and I'd like to be re-examined at that time. They go, all right, so in 2 or 3 months, when your personal psychologist says that they think that you're fit for duty, give us a letter to that effect. We'll contact our psychologist and we'll have you re-examined to see whether or not he concurs.
Would the psychologist ever decide, not about accommodation, but not fit for duty today, maybe fit for duty in the future after X, Y, and Z, and therefore recommend to the department, not fit today, I would like to reevaluate in a month's time?
Well, I don't, the question is when you find a person unfit for duty, is it also okay to communicate that you think that there may be hope in the near future with treatment?
Right.
Absolutely, if that's an invited question, but you've got to talk to the employer. You don't want to be in my opinion, you don't want to volunteer that latter opinion about restoration of fitness unless it's an invited part of the clinical referral. This is why I want my referral letter, I want the referral in writing. I want to know what the questions are. And that way I'm answering the very questions that are asked. Sometimes you'll get questions about whether or not the person has a neuropsychological deficit. I don't do neuropsychological evaluations, so I retain a board-certified specialist in neuropsychology to come into my office and as an independent contractor, conduct the neuropsychological piece of the fitness for duty evaluation, give the report to me, and then I integrate that into my findings. But I need to know that up front. Sometimes the questions are about medication, the effect of medication. Same thing, I'll either negotiate with the employer. I'm not a physician, I can't weigh in on medication. But if you really need to have that question answered in the context of this evaluation, I'll retain an expert who will conduct an evaluation for the psychopharmacological implications. So that's why it needs to all be in writing.
And laid out at the beginning.
Laid out in the beginning. Now, the other reason why I absolutely always have a letter is because I have a chapter coming out in 2 months that recommends you always have one. Can you imagine the first time I don't, and the attorney reads my chapter to me? Yeah, so I'm cooked. I have to.
It's a great recommendation, but I'm thinking about real life. Sometimes you encounter issues in the evaluation that were not known about. Not
Absolutely. The point is sometimes you encounter things in real life, in the context of the examination, that aren't covered in the letter. Absolutely, and here's how I handle those. I write a letter back, usually email, that's the way it's typically done now. I send an email message to the referral source, letting them know what the new contingency or information is. They respond back in writing, and that all becomes a part of the record. Yeah, I mean, absolutely, you got to be agile. You got to be agile. Sometimes your practice gets busy, you let your assistant know that this fitness for duty evaluation is coming, they open up the file, or they create a file for it, person's on the books, you're anticipating the letter is going to be coming in, the person comes into your office, you open up the file, where's the referral letter? Oh, I thought you had it, oh, I thought you had it. Oh, great, the person's in the office, we don't even have a referral letter. So, you know, I get on the phone and I try to find the person and they're not there, they're off in some training, and now that, you know, I gotta talk to somebody else. One of two things happens. The person either goes home and we reschedule the examination, or I write a letter that summarizes my understanding of what I'm being asked to do and what the facts are based upon the pre-referral conference. I send it to a person of authority in that agency, and I ask them to tell me whether or not my understanding of the facts is correct. And if the answer is yes, great, I've got my referral letter. I happen to be the guy who wrote it, but that's all right, it's all part of the record. I had a pre-referral conference, I articulated my understanding of that conference, and they acknowledged that my understanding is correct. So the effect is the same. Yes? Sure. If you're talking to a person above them, generally there's not a problem because the EEOC acknowledges that this personal health information, this medical information, may be communicated to people who have a need to know upstream. That's not true downstream or laterally. So I wouldn't be able to just call their coworkers and say, hey, I'm seeing Joe in a fitness for duty evaluation. What do you think? So I don't do that. What I do is I arrange for others to have those collateral interviews and then send me the information. Or at times I'll ask the employee, do you have some knowledgeable coworkers? I had a fellow the other day, worked in a fire department, fitness for duty evaluation. And he had made an outrageous threat against his fire captain. And then in some detail described what he would do with the rotting corpse afterwards. Now, there were two witnesses. One was both were direct subordinates, but one was a very close friend, had been friends for many, many years. And so he's telling me that he did this because that's the game they play. They will try to kind of one-up each other on how outrageous and profane they can be in their descriptions about their anger. He said, I know it sounds crazy, but that's what we do. I'm thinking, really? Well, I've seen that sounds like fire departments. It sounds like, yeah. So I'm thinking, all right, I want to know whether that's true. So I said, what's the name of the two people who were there? Blah, blah, blah. What's the name of the person that you have this funky agreement with? He tells me. What's his cell phone number? He said, well, I've got it on speed dial. I said, great, call him and tell him that you're in your fitness for duty evaluation with me. Does he know you're in a fitness for duty evaluation? Yeah, he knows. Great, tell him you're in here and that you want him to tell me the story about how you guys have this agreement. Don't tell him anything more because I want to make sure you're not prepping him. He said, really, right now? I said, yeah. I said, all right. So he calls him. He very appropriately tells him just what I asked him to do. I talk to the guy. He tells me exactly the same story. Great. Now I believe him. I have good reason to believe him. So I'll have that conversation, but I wouldn't just call him out of the blue. Okay.